My name is Don DeBar. I am a 70-year-old resident of the metropolitan New York area, pretty much lifelong. I do radio news for KPFK-FM, which is a Los Angeles station of Pacifica Radio Network in the United States. Political commentary for a variety of international media outlets, Press TV, RT, and others. I've been involved in politics pretty much since I was a child, and I've been interested in international affairs also since I was a wee laddie. I've traveled the world some. I've been to China, Russia, Cuba, Libya, all the places that they put a black mark in your passport for going to. And I speak with people around the world on a regular basis about politics and international relations.
Could you tell us a bit about New York? I know it's kind of known as quite a Jewish city, isn't it?
It's quite an everything city. There is a little Italy and a little Paris and little, just pretty much every city in the world has people living here. There's maybe 8 to 10 million people in the metropolitan New York area. It is commonly referred to as a Jewish city by people who find that very significant. I don't know that is a defining characteristic of it.
No, it's probably not. But it means they do have quite a strong Jewish community, don't they?
That's correct.
I mean, I'm referring to really is the people like you've got lots of secular Jews, but you've also got this interesting group, the Neturei Karta, who've got a chapter in London too. But there is, it's almost as if the things that are going on back in Israel get played out in New York, similar sorts of almost parallel communities.
Yes. And in addition to that, there's also a very large Arab community. There are both the group you referred to, who are, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, this is a group that is anti-Zionist.
Yeah, that's right. They're Orthodox Jews, Neturei Karta, anti-Zionist. They're very vocal. They get out on the streets all the time.
That's right. And they treat Israel as an aberration and worse. I forget the term of art they use. But that in essence it's the devil's creature and the sign of the end times. They are also some very conservative Jewish groups that are very Zionist in orientation, and that also is true of the suburbs, particularly Rockland County and Sullivan County in New York, which is to the north and west of New York City.
Could you say something about the upcoming presidential election, how you think things are going? Because it does kind of all hinge on these swing states, but we're hearing very little, I think, in the mass media about which way they're likely to run, whether or not the voters are going to punish and which voters, maybe the Muslim vote, might punish the Democrats for the support for Netanyahu. So what's the background and which way do you think it's heading?
Actually, some interesting things have shown in the polling recently. So we talk about swing states. Generally, the reference here in the United States is, the voting population here, like much of the voting population in certainly in the Americas, but also in the Western world, I think, is pretty evenly divided. There are only two major quote-unquote political parties. In other words, only two parties that regularly get anything approaching 50% of the vote. The Democrats and Republicans, ideologically, you'd have a difficult time parsing the difference between the two, with the exception of some very symbolic issues like abortion and gay rights, and even those are, the lines are blurring considerably. And the swing states are those states where from time to time the parties switch who carries the state. We have 50 states in the United States, first of all. You have, in essence, 50 elections for a presidential election. The states manage the election. The federal government does not. And so the candidate selection is state by state. They have what they call primary elections or preliminary elections in many of the states to see who the candidate's going to be of either of these two parties and also the minor parties. This has taken place over the course of the past year, and this year was very unusual. I won't even bother getting into that esoteria, but once you've had candidates selected through this process, people get to vote on it, then there's a convention where this is ratified by the delegates that were elected in the process, and blah, blah, blah. You come into this end of the summer and into the fall with two candidates that are campaigning against each other, debates, and then an election the first Tuesday in November. In the bulk of the 50 states, somewhere in the vicinity of 42 of them, I think, almost every year, either a Democrat or a Republican wins that state. In other words, they're not fluid in which candidate they're going to choose. In this state, it's going to be the Republican, and in this state, it's going to be the Democrat. If you look at a map of the United States, you'll find that, in fact, it is the coastal states, Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey, that are in particular, and Massachusetts and also Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, that will, and on the West Coast, California and Washington and Oregon, they're going to choose Democrats, also Illinois, and one or two others in the heartland. That would be in the colors they use now, blue states, and the rest of the map is red, with the exception of the following: Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. Those 6 states go back and forth, and they call these swing states. As a consequence of the fact that these states are up for grabs by either party, they end up being the focal point of both campaigns, of the advertising, of the appearances, personal appearances and glad handing and all of that. Also of the litigation, the shenanigans, all of the corrupt things that you've seen over the years with voting machines disappearing in the middle of the day and all that kind of crap. And that's been sort of the modality over the past decades, anyway, since maybe the 80s or 90s, and really formulating into that even earlier. This year, in fact, over the last couple of weeks, you wouldn't know it by looking at the mass media. If you were looking at the mass media here, which is on board with almost the entire political establishment, again, as it was in 2016, Harris is, ahead and putting distance between herself and Trump across the board. And in fact, that's not true. Across the board, in places where they're both charting, they're neck and neck. Trump is ahead in 3 or 4 of the so-called swing states, clearly. And Harris is having difficulty getting any traction.
Sorry, hang on, because you say 3 or 4. Well, it's crucial, isn't it? If it's 3, then that's an even tie. If it's 4, it's a win. Well,
and it's a little fluid, this part. And when they say ahead, I'm ahead by 4 points. The so-called margin of error is 3. But Trump is solidly in command of half of those, and from poll to poll, he's maybe ahead in 4 or 5. Harris is never ahead in more than 2 at a time. So it's kind of like that. I mean, we're tea leaf reading here. It's not science, But so what is important, or what's interesting, is that in non-swing states, and particularly Trump is starting to move ahead in states that have been Democratic states since at least 1980. And in particular, New York and New Jersey, there were polls over the last couple of days that showed Trump starting to cut deeply into Harris's lead in both of those, where it was possible that he could win one or both of those states, and that's never even discussed. Now, Trump's campaign it took a shift. I guess that would be a way of characterizing. Maybe a month and a half ago, his strongest support has been in the Rust Belt here, white male and white female voters, and he's had some support, but more almost negative support, but among black voters in urban areas, who in 2016 their support took the form of not getting out and voting for Hillary Clinton. It was, for example, some people say that Trump won the election in 2016 in the black neighborhoods in Philadelphia because the turnout there was abysmal compared to what it usually is for Clinton, and thus Trump was able to carry Pennsylvania, where the usual turnout in those neighborhoods would have swung it to Clinton. They went out, and that was true in urban centers in the Rust Belt in 2016, almost across the board. There was no enthusiasm for the Democratic candidate for Hillary Clinton among the groups that, not just black men, but particularly that traditionally lifted the Democratic Party up. And you can understand it because it's been a good long while now that this has been a bastion of support on the one hand, and the first group that you forget when you take office. There hasn't been any real programmatic assistance to the problems that ongoing problems of racism here and discrimination in jobs and housing and everything else, but also the legacy of it. In other words, repairing as reparations, some sort of correction of the problem that's the legacy of history of slavery and Jim Crow and all these other things. Democrats get the vote for acknowledging these problems, but they never do anything about it. And so that started to manifest in a lack of enthusiasm, to put it gently, that we saw in particular in 2016. We saw it again in 2020. There were other factors involved there, including some things that, in my opinion, constituted ballot box stuffing. But in any event, this year we're apparently seeing that again, and what Trump apparently intended to do and started doing, month and a half, I guess it was, I don't know, sometime over the midsummer. He went out, first held one of those big rallies in the South Bronx. And it was huge. And it was packed with black and brown folks from the South Bronx. And they were very enthusiastic. And what happened several days later was Trump took that show to Philadelphia, to those same neighborhoods I described before, and the same phenomenon there. And they started a little tour of the urban areas in the swing states, and then beyond that, and they started to do outreach to the black and brown voters in particular, and they've received a very positive response to where now some areas, some urban areas, you have black and brown voters showing 40% support for Trump, where the typical Republican candidate is somewhere between 15 and 25. So there's some things that are swinging around that are in motion. There's nothing really going on with the Biden administration that can remedy this in the short term. They've been in office now since, for almost 4 years. There's been no real initiative to satisfy any of the problems facing anybody, really. The economic situation for everyone has only gotten worse. You can lay blame wherever you like, but people perceive of it as being the responsibility of the people who were running the government during the time frame that you are discussing. And
yeah, I think it's a very similar situation, Don, in Britain, where we can see a slow decline, which is being managed by Tweedledum and Tweedledee, the Uniparty, bit by bit. But I've got to ask you about, you're talking about Trump trying to appeal to people. What about these assassination attempts? Certainly the first one would seem to be deadly serious. It'd be interesting to get your take just on, why the Secret Service seemed to kind of fall down on the job. And also, as to what it is about Trump that someone seems to want to get rid of, and who might that be?
Well, okay. So as far as what's actually happening in terms of who's behind it and whatnot, obviously this is something that's unknowable to us. And we can formulate, theories based, on deduction, basically. And so I'll do that. People do that. People are doing that all over the place. So I'll do that too. One interpretation is that there is a broad sense of dissatisfaction, to put it gently, or a lack of enthusiasm for Trump as president or as a presidential candidate among some very powerful sectors of the elite and or the security forces that are responsible for maintaining the position of the elite. CIA, FBI, et cetera, leadership positions, the political positions are very hostile to Trump. They were hostile to him when he was president and before he became president and after he became president. And these are the people who are responsible for his security as a candidate. You note that there have been, a pair of assassination attempts, one almost successful, apparently. Why, first of all, why anyone would want to kill him? There's either the people that want to kill him for reasons that are known to themselves and that are logical for where they are. That would be the elite that perceives him in one way or another as some kind of threat. Either he represents some factor in, some faction in the elite that is not dominant and that, perhaps his election would change that, their relative positions. Perhaps it is that they think he's just too crazy, cowboy, whatever it is, and would jeopardize their position through incompetence or sociopathy or whatever. And another explanation is that, and this would be either deliberately or not, either as a byproduct or as engineered, that the barrage of, propaganda, the public relations information, he is treated in the media and has been since the 2015 as a human pariah, in essence. He's an Adolf Hitler in waiting. We had for many years, since I was a kid, one of the ethics problems that they would face, and there's a Stephen King book and a movie based on it, The Dead Zone, that refers to this. If you could time travel, and if you knew what you know now, and even though you are opposed to violence and killing, if you could kill Hitler before he became chancellor, would you? Knowing you would save, or assuming that you would save the lives of millions of people in doing so. This is an ethics problem that people present you with in various places, school, etc. That a lot of people have had that question posed and have seen that in the media and elsewhere.
Yeah, and listen, sorry to interrupt you, but it's not just a question. This has happened. We had David Aronovich here in the UK just a few days before the assassination, the first one on Trump, actually calling for his assassination. We've also had the naturalist, the BBC wildlife presenter, David Attenborough, a few years ago saying that somebody's going to have to kill Trump to save the planet.
Yeah, and not only that, back after he was elected president, shortly after he was elected president, in the New York Times alone, on the editorial page, I forget who it was, Charles Blow, one of them called for him to be assassinated. This may be the only thing that could save the country is if somebody killed him. And there was also a book in the New York Times book review section where it was a fantasy of the protagonist in the book that Trump would be assassinated. This is not it's been out in the mainstream. The idea is in front of a lot of people. I'm just saying, in the culture, this is already like a moral problem that people have been raised to deal with. And now they're confronted with the suggestions all over the place and a picture painted of Trump as that guy. And so I was saying, on the one hand, maybe you have some people who are self-motivated and moving actors. We're going to kill him because he threatens us. And then others that are just, we're going to do MK Ultra or whatever kind of crazy, robotizing of the population, Manchurian candidate, whatever. We know there's so many people out there who would love to kill Hitler before he kills others. So if we tell everybody that he's Hitler and we remind people of this all over the place, somebody's going to do it. I don't know which of that it is, but it sure as hell seems that. And okay, I remember when John Kennedy was assassinated in November 22nd in 1963. And I remember the aftermath of that, including changes to the law that they were at the time looked at like severe infringement on the First Amendment here, the right of free speech. And it was, in essence, if you advocate for the assassination of the president, this is like major felony crime. They whisk you away and lock you in a room and then throw away the room. And now you've gone from that, and this is the first time since then that I'm aware of, and I've been paying attention to this stuff since 1963, where it's normal for the idea of killing Trump to be discussed and advocated. So I'm not surprised that it's happened. This very same people who want to circumscribe the speech of everyone, if they determine that it's hate speech, are speaking this particular hate speech, that this guy who we disagree with is so evil that he should die. And those of you who have had any ethical training, you know what to do next.
Yeah, it's a sort of dog whistle. So when it actually comes to the presidential election, I noticed NBC recently had an interesting article headline, experts find nearly 36 US voting systems which are connected to the internet. A team of election security experts used Google for servers to challenge claims that voting machines do not connect to the internet, and they found many did. This was a couple of years ago, but it's an assurance apparently designed to bolster public confidence in the way America votes. Voting machines are not connected to the internet, they said. Then, acting Under Secretary of Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security, Jeanette Manfra, said those words in 2017, testifying before Congress. She was responsible for the security of the nation's voting system. Quite clearly, this was a lie. Or else she just didn't know her brief. What do you make of the security of the voting system? Well, wouldn't it be a good idea to just go back to paper ballots, maybe?
Yeah, it's interesting. While I'm speaking with you, I'm computer on mine has Bing up on the front page, so I ran a search through Bing voting systems connected to the internet, and so I've got Euronews in 2020. Experts find nearly 36 U.S. voting systems connected to what you just said from 2020. I've got a Vice article from 2019. I've got a PBS, it's public broadcasting system here, the government-sponsored TV or corporate-sponsored TV. Voting experts warn of serious threats for 2024 from the same thing, nearly 24 computer scientists, et cetera. It's, in other words, and this year. So this is something they've been saying, steady. And we'll recall back in the year 2000 with the hanging chads and the voting machines that were working on punch cards were having problems. And the following year, the black box voting machines in Ohio and elsewhere were accused of being fixed and rigged. And just about every election since, somebody's pointed to this as a problem. One thing that hasn't happened, which is what's absolutely necessary to get past this, is to mandate paper ballots and that they be preserved. And if you're going to use electronic tallying, that it be nothing more than a simple, motion, in administrative level court to have the machine count verified with a hand count of the paper ballots. Now, where I am in New York, you go into the polling place, you present yourself, it's divided, there's maybe 10 people in there from the League of Women Voters or whatever. And you got ABC, your last name, your surname, ABC, DEF, GHI, like that. You go to the line that you're supposed to go to with your last name. They look you up on the rolls, and they should identify you. Some places they do, some places they don't. And then when they determine that you're eligible to vote, they hand you a piece of paper and a pen. You go into a spot with a curtain around it, fill out the piece of paper, and come back. Then you go over to a machine. There's an assistant there. You feed the ballot into the machine. The machine reads the ballot, and some of the machines give you a receipt, and the ballot drops into the machine. It's a belly of the machine that holds the ballots. Those ballots are supposed to be in a seal and under the supervision, in the chain of custody of the election officials, and to be available to be opened and read immediately after the electronic count is published at the end of the day. Now, that's how it's done here. It's not done that way in many places in the United States. There's no paper ballot, or there is a gulf between permanent chain of custody and being able to audit the electronic result with the paper that could be reliably counted as, being the way it was filled out. I was asked to be an election observer for the presidential election in Russia this past March. And I was in Krasnoyarsk in Siberia for 3 days. They had 3 days of voting. I think it was the 17th, 18th, and 19th or something, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of the weekend that had St. Patrick's Day on it this year. And we went to maybe 7 or 8 polling places each of the 3 days to observe what was happening there, and took notes and spoke with people and interviewed people and all of this. And the very first place that I went into, I was shocked to see the procedure was identical to the procedure that we have here in Ossining, New York, with that kind of a machine. And that the only distinction that I saw that was visible was the fact that when you went to speak to an election official to look up whether you're on the list or not, you had to show an official identification. So it was more difficult to, for example, go in and vote pretending you're someone who is on the list, but they're dead, or some other shenanigans. But otherwise, you take the ballot, you go into a place with privacy. There's a little curtain you go behind. You mark the ballot up, you bring it out and stick it in the machine. The machine reads the ballot and tells you, thank you, off you go. And then at the end of the day, the machine tells you what's in it. And the paper's in there, and they pull the paper out if somebody says, I object, or I want to know what the paper count is. And they do the hand count of the paper, and they verify the electronic. Now, there's something additional in Russia that they do that they don't do here. And that is that every polling place in the country is connected to a video surveillance system to the regions, which is sort of like the province or state entity, to the region's election headquarters. So 24/7 from the time they open the polls, when they drop the machines in and set them up. So when they open them for operation at the beginning of the election cycle, and until they remove the machines, there is a video streaming to this. And we saw the office where they have dozens of people looking at walls full of monitors, like big monitor with a bunch of little monitors dividing the screen and rotating and all of that. And it's all being stored. So for example, there were a couple of places where there were attempts to sabotage the election, where people went into the voting place and dropped an ink cartridge, or tried to drop an ink cartridge into one of the machines to waste the paper ballots. They got caught, but they also got prosecuted with top flight evidence, Okay, this was voting place number 1152, Krasnoyarsk, Northwest Quadrant, 4:02 p.m. Thursday. Run back the video. Yep, that's you, isn't it? Throwing that ink cartridge in, like that. In other words, the entire procedure is transparent. We don't have that here. I've seen in elections, I've done, worked on elections here for 20, 30 years. And I've seen machines disappear. Like, we're the machine maintenance crew. Well, there's something wrong with this machine. We're replacing it. And they wheel it off and bring in a new one. While they're doing that, you call on the Board of Elections and you're on hold. And then when they leave with the machine, they're finally like, we'll have to look into that and get back to you. And at the end of the day, no one knows anything about it. That kind of stuff goes on here in New York. I have no idea what goes on like in Louisiana.
That machine could have been half full or even full of ballots.
That's exactly the point. That's why you would do it, isn't it? I don't like what I know that machine is going to say I don't like, so I'm swapping it out for one that's got some more friendly results in it. That happens. That happens.
Well, okay. So what do you make of the how much integrity is there in this process? I mean, the thing is, it may, if there's a big difference between the candidates, that's very difficult to fix. But if it's a fine line, it's easy. Yeah,
that's the thing. And it is largely, that's what I'm saying here in the United States. Okay, I live in Westchester County, which is immediately adjacent to New York City to the north. There are 31 municipalities, village, town, and city governments in Westchester County. And you have a county board of elections that conducts the election in the county. But you have 31 local government officials and 31 municipal entities, and these are voting entities. They have districts that they're further broken down into districts. So, but each of these municipalities, if you look at Westchester with its 31, it's a patchwork of blue and red. The majority countywide is Democratic, but there are towns that are Republican. It's almost half of the towns. It's like, 11 out of 31 or, something like that. 13 out of 31. And so, in terms of, it being divided, it depends on whether you're at a local election, like, for the village board, or city council or the county board of legislators. And then there's the state legislature and the state is divided. You have a bicameral legislature. It's kind of a strange duck because its original structure was similar to, the British and, the modifications they made here with the Senate and the House of Representatives, where you'd have the population-based legislature, the assembly, they call it in New York, is the House of Representatives and the Feds, or the Commons where you are. And then you'd have one that was based on some other criteria. Here, that was the Senate, where each of the states has the same number of representatives, has two. And New York was kind of like that, too, where you had counties and county supervisors and such, and they sort of created a college or a house that was part of the legislature, not based on population, but based on the number of entities. Like each county had, somebody in the legislature. They did away with that about 25, 30 years ago in the court system here. And now the Senate resembles the House or the Assembly. In other words, it's also population-based, and it's a different layover, but it's basically a different compromise that happens every 10 years when they redraw the maps, which is what happens in the United States. So when you engage in these battles, in many places, they're very evenly divided, even if the overall map isn't. And as you note correctly, the closer it is, the easier it is to cheat, basically. If I'm running neck and neck with somebody else and I pull some shenanigans that makes me win, my win is going to be believable to most people who are familiar with the facts because, hey, it was a toss-up. He got it. If I'm losing 5-1 and I pull some shenanigans and win, a lot of people are like, what the hell is going on here? And now the problem is what appears to be and what is are very often two different things. And this is obviously something anyone who's taken even basic philosophy or any science course knows. Appearance is not the same as essence. It's not what looks like isn't always what is. And so when you have the media telling you, as in 2016, and all the media companies' polls telling you that, and even Jimmy the Greek or whatever telling you, it's 38-2 that Hillary Clinton's going to win the election, and then Trump wins. Well, it's a lot easier to sell the idea that the Russians did it or some people from outer space did it or whatever, because how in the hell else could this have happened? Because everybody knows Trump didn't have a chance. So, that's just with the perception. If people didn't expect it to happen and then it does happen, it raises their suspicions. Whether or not they think it's going to happen isn't necessarily based on the real possibility, but rather on what they believe to be the real possibility.
One of the things I quite like about elections is exit polls. Where you've got party members outside the polling stations just literally polling people as they leave. Mm-hmm. They're pretty accurate. They tend to be pretty accurate. But now, this country, they don't happen. I don't know if it's been somehow made illegal or they've been persuaded not to do it. They certainly don't have the exit polls during the day of the election anymore. That just doesn't happen. But it was one very good indication of the way that the vote was going later in the day. Anyway, look, whether it all works as it's supposed to or not, who's going to win?
Yeah, that's a tough call. I want to note something very quickly on that exit poll thing. The State Department, when it's looking around the world and deciding what's a legitimate election and what's not, has actual quantifiable criteria. And that is that they look at exit polls and compare them to the official count. And if there's a vector of more than 15% between the two, they decide that the election is cooked and they don't recognize it as a legitimate election. What was interesting is that the former Secretary of State, who was the head of the State Department, obviously, that ran for president in 2016, had a vector of sometimes 30 and 35% between the exit poll data and the primary data in the primaries that put her ahead of Bernie Sanders. I don't know if people know that, but the State Department uses exactly that exit polling as the real benchmark for deciding if the election's been cooked or not. And so when they're doing away with it here, it's because they know it works and they're trying to obfuscate something. Who's going to win? I mean, it's a toss-up. First is who's going to be alive on Election Day. That I'm not so sure that Donald Trump is going to make it. He's on an airplane a lot. I'm thinking of our former friend Dag Hammarskjöld as one example. That Ron Brown, some others, that people do tend to have airplane problems when they are out of favor with the elites. Another, though, is if he does make it, what's going to happen in terms of the same fight? Something happened legally and in terms of practice in the country between 2016 and 2020 that changed the outcome of the election in 2020. You can, quibble, mud wrestle, whatever, over whether or not these things were legal. But what was done was that the practice that had been well established in practice and law for allowing people to vote on paper ballots remotely, in other words, to send in by mail or carrier pigeon or whatever, a ballot filled out from a remote location, was vastly expanded in Pennsylvania and Georgia in particular. And it's known because these ballots that came in through that mechanism in Pennsylvania in particular came in separately, and Georgia also. They came in separately. They came in mail bags, separate from the votes that had come from the boards of elections from the machines. And they changed the outcome from Trump to Biden because they were massively in favor of Biden. Now, in Pennsylvania, first of all, the U.S. Constitution, the federal government has very little to do with the conduct of elections in the United States, of presidential elections. That is left to the states to do. I mentioned that earlier. However, there are some very fundamental federal, in fact, a constitutional requirement for this. And that is that the law will be conducted in accordance with the laws passed by the state legislatures. That's an article in the U.S. Constitution. So you had an election law that had been established by the legislature and by practice in Pennsylvania, going back to the Constitution, the 1794, to whenever the first election was. And that had very restrictive ways of handling ballots that are off-site. If I am going to be driving around with truckloads of paper ballots, you can imagine what kind of mischief I can get into. These are things that you keep them very tight, close custody, so that there's no further possibility of fraud. They're very easy to change ballots and hand in pieces of paper filled up by someone else. And so the law has been very mindful of that. Well, in preparation for the 2020 election, in fact, in 2019 and 2018, in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, but in Pennsylvania here, the attempt was made in the state legislature by Democrats to allow much more liberal procedures for filling out a ballot remotely. That people who were elderly, people who were having transportation problems, people who were confined to the house for some other reason, and anyone else really that finds it more convenient. Public policy should be to make it as easy to vote as possible, and we would like to, make this much more available to a lot more people voting this way. And so they proposed a change to the law. They voted on it, and the Republicans had a majority, and they voted it down. And they said, no way in hell are we going to allow this. It invites fraud. Then this COVID comes up, and they came back with it saying, well, COVID and plague, and all of that, and it was voted down again. And so then the Democratic governor issued an executive order imposing it, saying based on COVID. And then the Attorney General, Democrat, issued an interpretive ruling that further authorized it. And then the boards of elections issued amended regulations on how to handle them, because they were being handed a fait accompli because the governor ordered that this be done, and it was being done. And so the votes came in, and they changed the outcome of Pennsylvania, and the same thing happened in Georgia. That is what was the subject matter of the discussion between Trump's people and Trump and the people in Georgia that they tried to put Trump in jail for, was that, look, we know this is in violation of the Constitution. We can't find a judge that'll hear the case on this, but you know that it is also. You just read the damn thing. That was the bullying that was going on. So this is a problem that's been, sort of in abeyance since 2020 that still exists. Now, the courts were reluctant to touch it. Without getting too esoteric, there were like 50 some odd court cases. The people used the number 60. I don't remember what the hell that's based on, but there were dozens of court cases looking to address this, and most of them were dismissed without touching the merits. You serve the wrong. It's very difficult to bring an election case in procedurally. They work on a very, very fast calendar, because the world is watching for the outcome, because the oath of office is, 60 days away. They don't have time to go to court for 5 years and litigate things. So you have to sue and serve everybody within like 72 hours, which means you have to prepare your pleadings, your case, in less than 72 hours. That starts with a list of who you have to sue as a necessary party. You have to sue the governor and the attorney general and each of the members of the Board of Elections. How many people are on the boards of elections? Okay, 12. Do we have their names and addresses? The current ones? That kind of crap. Well, in the case in Pennsylvania, for example, in a number of places, there were errors that normally would be treated as, look, it's a procedural error, but we're going to let the case go ahead and we'll deal with it. They were dismissed on these grounds. They call them threshold grounds. You didn't sue the right party. The party that brought the lawsuit, a voter, not a candidate, didn't have standing, or other stupid things. There were a couple that were allowed to be heard on the merits. One of them was in Pennsylvania, and it should have been a home run. It should have had those ballots dismissed, and the court said, we don't believe it's the role of the judiciary. Because we see this may change the outcome of the election, we don't want to be involved because we don't think the court should be involved in, put their thumbs on the scale for an election. So that issue was never resolved, but everybody sees it hanging there. And so they've been maneuvering around that up to this point. And now we're going to see, like next month and the month after, how it plays out. I don't know. And I'm not sure anyone really does know, because there's been so much activity and so much of it. And if you take these people at their word in either case, this is the most momentous election in the history of the universe. And if this one is elected, oh my God, the world is going to be over. And if that one's elected, oh my God, it's even worse than that. Against the backdrop, by the way, of we do know you have a guy who's barely sentient, who's the nominal president of the United States. We know he's not exercising the duties of office. He can barely make it up a staircase. We see this on television almost daily now. The United States is at war with Russia, and they're threatening. Russia is saying, if you do the following things at this point, we're going to start dropping nuclear bombs, using nuclear weapons, because you're trying to threaten. If you reach a point where you're threatening the survival of our state, we're taking you out. And here they're talking about across the board, Foreign Policy magazine and everywhere. They're full of it. They're not going to do anything. Let's do these things. This is one side of the two people that are running for office. The other guy's saying it's a bad idea. So it is an important election. Yeah. I just don't know what's going to happen.
I know. I just want to just imagine everything works out from a electoral mechanics point of view correctly, or one candidate and the other gets a reasonably good majority. What's your sense, though, for the feeling in the US for the Democratic Party, whether they're likely to be punished by the Muslim voters, etc.? I just want to, if you had to put your money one way or the other, or my money, which way would it
go? Well, first of all, I don't know how this is going to work. I've never seen the kind of I won't say never, but certainly there's a great deal of dissatisfaction with the Democrats over what's happened in Gaza and is happening now in Lebanon and in the Middle East. This seems to have catalyzed a lot more public opinion than the fact that we're at war with Russia, which is I understand it looking at the TV show, that's on every day, but it's baffling to me in terms of actual. I'm not dismissing the idea that the extinguishing of a people is not of the highest order, but rather that Armageddon is of the highest order, and I think that's what we're toying with in the war with Russia. Certainly, though, the idea of a war between Israel and Iran goes pretty close to Armageddon, and as a matter of fact, geographically, is a lot closer to the actual place Armageddon. I don't see, if we get through the election, I don't see half of the population, no matter what the numbers are, accepting it. And the rhetoric now, on the one hand, kill Trump and his troglodyte, mob, MAGA animals, or on the other hand, kill these people, these murderous. I guess they take on religious tones too. These heathens that, whatever the hell else they call the devil. Yeah, they use religious terminology. Each of the two groups, by the way, in one fashion or another, to denigrate the other side, and each thinks that the other side is angling, and they're right probably, to steal the election. I mean, the reality is the election has been stolen. Nobody that I want is got a chance in hell of becoming president through this. And as a matter of fact, nobody voted for Harris, and there's nobody to challenge Trump in the Republican Party. So, like, the average voter in the United States really had no role whatsoever in choosing either of the two candidates from which the next president is going to be selected, unless.
Look, you're a wise man to be reluctant, but I'm going to give you $1,000. Which way?
Which one's going to win? I think Trump will actually win, but I don't know that that'll be acknowledged by the system.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, look, let's wind up by just looking at, I think you're quite right about Ukraine. That is a fairly clear cut. But this Israeli attack on Lebanon this week, you had a very interesting situation with Biden on Monday, calling with other leaders of the West for this ceasefire over the weekend of the Israelis. And then basically Netanyahu on Monday threw that right back in his face and said, "Up yours, I'm invading Lebanon." So what this is a little bit interesting. Well, it's interesting for me because it's quite obvious that if the US cut off the arms and finance to Israel, they'd collapse, literally collapse. And yet Netanyahu doesn't seem to care what he says about Biden at all.
Well,
or what Biden says about him.
Biden is a meat puppet that is really sort of he may be detached from the strings, but there's nothing else to motivate him. He's just kind of flumping around. Policies being at least implemented by Blinken, Sullivan, Kirby, those people. And they're telling you pretty much what's going to happen, and they are not walking from Netanyahu. Some of the things that have been done, by the way, don't just require the U.S. to stand down while they do it. They require active participation of the U.S. military and intelligence, signal intelligence, all of that. Targeting, a bunch of the things that have happened required absolute assent and cooperation with the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. And so they are acts of the United States government. So, my believing what I just said, I believe that to be true. My belief is that this war is, or the appearance of a war is by design from Washington, Langley, wherever. It's targeting Iran and the Gulf states. I'm trying to figure out exactly why you would want to take on Russia, Venezuela, the Gulf states, and Iran all at the same time a month and a half before an election, when gasoline could go up to $100 a gallon and kill your candidate. But it seems to me that they are forcing this issue one way or another, and I think it's because they intend to take out some of the nuclear facilities in Iran, and or perhaps cause a collapse of one kind. Let's not forget the president was just died or was assassinated, in the middle of these other heads of state being clearly assassinated inside of like 6 weeks, 8 weeks. If you're part of the elite there, you're looking at the sky every minute while you're deciding how to deal with these people that are telling you we're coming for you next. I have no idea what kind of impact that has on someone. But, it may temper one's defiance to a degree that that maybe what we're looking at is some chest thumping. So that I prefer what they described back in JFK's day when they were talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, the hope for cooler heads to prevail. But I don't know where they would come from. Certainly not here.
Well, and certainly not Tel Aviv. The Netanyahu on Monday was talking about he addressed the Iranian people of all things, and he was saying how he would help them overthrow their government and actually reverse the 1979 revolution. He's obviously doing a similar sort of thing over in Lebanon now, saying that he will help the Lebanese people rid themselves of the dreadful Hezbollah. If the Hezbollah weren't there, there would be loving kindness would be breaking out all around Golan Heights, and the same exact thing with Gaza actually. So if Hamas weren't there, then I wouldn't have to kill all your children. Right. I mean, he really seems to have kind of got this kind of messianic complex that he really does think that he is the ruler of the Middle East, and that all that people got to do if they want peace is to just obey him. And he's got the solution, So this is one of the most extraordinary speeches, messianic type speeches I've ever seen. Yeah. And it's Netanyahu who seems to be, in another sense, absolutely up against the wall, because he's trying to fight this war on something like 7 fronts now. Right.
And as soon as he walks out of that office, he's in chains on his way to prison too. That's that he's not all that after all, is he? But at the moment, he's if he's going down, he's sending a whole lot of people ahead of him, and that is something that needs to be addressed. I was on Press TV saying this last week, while everyone was here for the heads of state general debate. In my opinion, was a missed opportunity. Not only walking out on him as they did when they spoke, I really thought if they just walked out on the entire proceeding and shut it down, it's sort of a unique opportunity to be heard that loudly by the heads of state. Because I don't see anything materially being done anywhere else to defend these people. I don't see it anywhere else. And it's not a failing of anyone, it's the conditions. I mean, Iran, it's easy to say Iran should blow up Israel. But the reality is that if Iran tries to blow up Israel, Iran will get blown up too. And who knows what else. You got the United States backing. Israel was a United States aircraft carrier, as they used to describe it. It's a foothold for, and I don't know if you want to put a hierarchy, United States or Israel. Whoever really runs the Western construct, the empire, whoever the real power is, these are two instruments of theirs. And they're working on the same project, which is to increase their power and diminish that of others.
Don, how do listeners find you, follow you, that sort of thing?
I'm on Facebook, Don DeBar, DonDebar, at Twitter, at Don DeBar, one word. Same at Truth Social, which is the Trump Twitter. Same on VK.com, Don DeBar, and YouTube, Don DeBar.
Okay, Don, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much, and thanks for the work you do, too.